welcome to our surf presentation. My name is Jesus Parra Gutierrez, and this is my research partner,
Emily Murgle.
And today we will present on the relationship between Disney princess roles and unemployment during World War II and the Great Recession of 2008.
So the first thing we want to talk about is that we are seeing a trend of polarizing differences between the females and the male lead roles within this film industry. More specifically, we see this trend within the Disney princess films throughout World War II and the Great Recession of 2008 film era. What this study will explore is the correlation between the evolution of practiced gendered characteristics and their gender's prospective employment rate throughout the medium of Disney princess films.
Hypothesis. We have one overarching hypothesis, and this is that Disney princess films are more likely to exhibit performed gender roles in relation to historical unemployment highs and lows for both males and females. We also have hypothesis based on the eras as well as unemployment rates. The language and actions of leading male and female characters represent the performed gender roles according to the times in which they were produced. So what we are hoping to see is that the higher male unemployment rates, the more masculine characteristics are performed by leading female roles. And the second part to that is lower female unemployment rates lead to more feminine characteristics that are performed by leading male roles. Then the third and final part to our hypothesis is that Disney princess films post the Great Recession of 2008 are more likely to have an upsurge in performed masculine characteristics by the female leads. And the second part to that is Disney princess films in the World War II era are more likely to contain traditional performed female characteristics by the leading female role.
So now looking into our hypothesis and how we developed that, we use three theories in specific. So the first one is the social cognitive theory, and this uses human attributes to create symbols that provide a tool for comprehending the environment around us and helps regulate that environment so that we can virtually touch every aspect of our individual lives. Following that, we use framing, which refers to the process of developing a particular conceptualization of an issue or reorienting our position to view it differently and how we think about these issues. Lastly, we use alter casting, which is projecting an identity to be assumed by others, and we want to look at this in terms of the interaction, which is congruent with one's individual goals and conceptualization of those goals.
Now we move on to the methods portion of our research. We watched a total of 6 Disney princess films, 3 from the classic Disney era, which included films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, as well as Sleeping Beauty. Then we looked at 3 films from what we consider the new Disney era. These films were Princess and the Frog, Tangled, and Frozen. The male and female characteristics of the lead roles were accounted by analyzing and coding each action that was performed by the lead roles in each movie, and then whether it be performed or spoken, and then that action was piled into a characteristic that best matched. Some of the masculine characteristics were wanting to explore, gives advice, brave, etc. When it comes to female characteristics, it's stuff like tends to physical appearance, fearful, and being the victim, among others.
So now we are looking at Figure 7 and Figure 8, which represent the whole composite of both masculine characteristics within Figure 7, and then within the female characteristics within Figure 8. So these took all of the 3 movies within the classical era, or World War II era, and what we find is that there's not a lot of diversity between the two. Males are performing traditional male characteristics, and females are performing traditional female characteristics, and their lead roles are sticking to those characteristics. So men are going to be performing very physically strong actions, they're going to be very assertive and described as physically handsome, where on the other side of things, females are going to be considered very submissive, They're going to show a lot of emotion, and they're going to be tentative and helpful, really embodying those classical, traditional Disney ideals. And so, with this being said, we're not seeing the two cross over or perform each other's interactions. They are sticking very much so to those originals, and we're not seeing men perform female characteristics and women perform male characteristics.
Now, if you look over to figure 17 and 18, there are also composites of characteristics for both male and females, but now this is the Great Recession of 2008. This is really where our research starts getting really interesting, because if you look at figure 17, the composite of male characteristics, there is an upsurge in performed masculine characteristics by female leads. As we see one of the categories like assertiveness throughout 3 films in the 2008 recession period, we see more than 40 instances where the female lead is assertive, followed by independence, and then as well as physically strong and athletic. Looking at figure 18 for the composite of female characteristics, we see that it's still dominated by female lead roles. However, what we like to see is that male lead roles are performing more female or feminine characteristics during this time, and this really starts to bring in the idea of a new Disney prince.
And then going back to figure 7 and figure 8, we start to ask ourselves, now what does this have to do with unemployment and employment rates throughout World War II? As World War II was increasing, what happened was men went into the war and were drafted, whereas women started to enter into the workforce. This gave women a new opportunity. This is where we see the We Can Do It poster that came out, I believe, in the 1950s. With that being said, though, when men returned back from war, what we are seeing is a reversal, and women are entering back into the household again, and their employment rates skyrocketed. They were very employed, and then they went back immediately down to being very low and having a lot of unemployment. And so men are going to be seen as this heroic figure, and within the film industry as well, because what we find is that our film industry is a parallel to our lives. And so with those theories that we mentioned earlier, we find that we are going to dictate and we are going to project what is going on within our society, within this film industry, which is exactly what happened. These films show the very similar concepts and themes with men leaving from war and then returning back.
Now looking at the data for the 2008 recession, which is actually known as, or also known as the man session. This was because industries where it was typically male-dominated were the most affected by this recession. So that meant that men spent more time at work, and females were still employed. It was kind of like role reversal in a way. Males had to perform more feminine characteristics, while females had to perform more masculine characteristics. And we see that being supported by our films. Like Emily had mentioned before, movies aren't necessarily an escape from a reality, but a parallel, a screenshot to the times we live in. What we ended up noticing from this is that this data supports the theory of androgyny, which means that females and males aren't sticking to traditional roles, but are crossing over when it comes to performed characteristics.
And so ultimately throughout this, our overall discussion is that Disney films are modeled after what is occurring in our society and the ways in which the gender is being performed. Classical Disney princesses do not perform as many masculine characteristics as the new Disney. The princesses in the new Disney are performing both feminine characteristics as well as masculine characteristics. And I'll let Jesus touch on some of the other advice that we offer if this study was to be explored further.
So some advice that we should look at is look into the heads, or see what the company's message was during these times. Also, we noticed that the reason that male lead roles in the classical Disney era didn't have many actions performed or spoken is because they didn't have a lot of screen time. They were pretty one-dimensional characters. We want to look at the movements that happened during that time. That's something we didn't really look at. When it comes to 2008, that really comes 2 years after really the start of the Me Too movement, which started in about 2006. So did that have to play a role in Disney princess movies being more androgynous rather than following traditional values? We understand that we've left out some movies like Brave, Mulan, and so on, as well as Moana, which are great examples of Disney princesses that do not follow into traditional Disney princess molds, but are really trailblazers. They're really trailblazers in today's film industry. And this was our surf presentation on Disney princess movies and the relation to and economic highs and lows in American